Welcome to Philosophy 101,000, where I give you guys a sneak preview of some of the ideas that I'm trying to build into the lecture before I lecture. And what I really want to focus on in these videos are ideas that are occurring to me for the first time as I read through the material for the thousandth time. And I try to build something new in each time I teach these texts. So Crito is a text I teach all the time. And tomorrow we're doing the first half, roughly, of Crito. And the first half is really taken up by Crito just throwing everything but the kitchen sink at Socrates in terms of reasons that he, Socrates, should escape jail. And Crito gives him a whole bunch of different kinds of reasons, right? Is Socrates, I'll lose a friend. Socrates, if you think it's because it's going to cost a lot to get you out of here, it's not. We've taken care of it. If you're worried you're not going to have a place to stay, don't worry, we've taken care of that. By the way, it's also unjust to remain here when you can escape. And by the way, if you have children, you should also stick around as long as you can, help educate them, etc., etc., etc. It's a really long list. And there's a great temptation as a teacher, because philosophy teachers love to reconstruct arguments. There's a real temptation to try to go through that list and see whether Socrates does a good enough job responding to the case that Crito makes. But over the years, I've really backed away from that because I think Plato himself has Socrates make a more profound argument here about the sorts of reasons one should pay attention to when things get really real, when there's a crisis and all of a sudden it seems like we really need to act, okay? So I take it that one of the things Plato really wants us to think about here are two conflicting visions of practical reason, namely two conflicting visions as to how to think about what to do. Especially in a case of crisis. Because a case of crisis is what we're dealing with here. You know, time is of the essence. Socrates needs to make a move now, or he's going to be executed in the next couple days. So one thing I want to focus on tomorrow is exactly how to understand this conflict between these two different visions of practical reason. And on this last reading, it really struck me that Crito's understanding of what an excellent human being is to do in a situation like this really resembles Meno's description of manly virtue near the beginning of the dialogue named after him. Recall that he says that the virtue of a man is to manage your affairs such that you can harm your enemies and help your friends. And it seems to me that Crito thinks that to be practically smart is to be clever about how to do that, about how to protect your friends, to ensure that no harm comes to them, and if necessary, to harm your enemies. Okay, you know, it's a very realistic way of thinking. He understands Socrates's principles, such as they are. He understands the arguments that Socrates has been making for many years now, ever since Crito's known him. But he thinks that real life is not about these ideas. Real life is about this conflict where your enemies are willing to use brute force, they're willing to use the legal system against you, they're willing to use financial resources against you, and they're willing to persuade the majority such that they turn against you. And to be practically clever is to know how to play chess on that board, right? Because whatever ideas you may have about the best way to live life, those ideas are only going to prevail if a couple upstarts like Miletus and Lycon and Anytus can't ruin your whole project on a couple trumped up charges, right? So It's a fairly sophisticated view of the way the world works. Socrates, on the other hand, is rather simplistic when it comes to what practical reason is. He thinks that the way to be smart about what to do is you simply uh, ask what your principles require of you in the moment. That's it. That's it. Um, one does not need to worry about one's so-called enemies and how they could potentially harm you, how they could potentially ruin you. And one certainly does not need to think about how to get back at one's enemies. Socrates' view is going to turn out to be that we do not need to give any thought to what the majority will say about us or what they will make of this entire episode. The fact that I will not escape, the fact that I will drink the hemlock poison, the fact that Miletus and Anytus and Lycon will have gotten the better of me. What people are going to make of this today and in the future, and it's noteworthy that both Socrates and Crito seem to understand that these events are of historical significance. In other words, that they will be talked about for a long time. Socrates' view is that what the majority think happened here, how they explain it to themselves, is of no consequence. The only thing that matters is whether we adhere to our principles. And Crito seems to think things are much more complicated than that. So one thing I want to do tomorrow is try to get somewhat systematic about the difference between these two views of practical reason and whether Socrates can persuade us that he's right. As you guys work your way through the dialogue, you'll see that Crito's just kind of bowled over by Socrates. He doesn't really have a chance. But more interesting, perhaps, is whether we find Socrates's very straightforward view of how to conduct oneself in a crisis, whether we ourselves find it more persuasive than Crito's more sophisticated view. All right, see you tomorrow.